Hello, I'm Pastor Tim Holscher. Thank you for joining me. Last week, we talked about the fact that sin isn't an absolute. That actually will cause a lot of Christians a great deal of consternation because that's not what they've been taught. But this passage and a few others will kind of tell you the same thing. Verse 23 of Romans 14 is talking about the immature believer. It's helping both the immature believer himself, but even more so the stable, mature believer appreciate and understand the problem that this immature believer has. Namely, if you do something and you're not convinced that it's what God wants for you, if you have a doubt, you doubt that it is what God wants for you or that it's okay from God's point of view, guess what? That might just cause you to sin. Might be an act of sin if you go ahead and do that thing. Notice what he says here. Romans chapter 14, verse 23. It says, but the one who doubts. Interesting thing, and I think we maybe talked about this word doubt before, but it's this word over here, diakrino, which is an interesting term because it means to be judged through, and it has the idea that there's a judgment here and he's divided on it. Is it this or it's this? I don't know. Should I do this thing or should I do this thing? Now, we can go to the store and we can look, should I buy vanilla or should I buy chocolate? Oh, that's not the kind of doubt that he's having or talking about. He's talking about a doubt about whether an activity is going to be okay with God. So when I was growing up, should a Christian go to a dance or not? Should, still an issue for most Christians today, should you drink alcohol in any form or not? That is, should you, whatever form that might take. Should Christians go to movies? Oh, that was a big issue when I was growing up. Maybe not quite as much of an issue with some believers today, but I'm sure it still is. How should you dress? In other words, we have a lot of issues other than just the issue here of what day you keep or you treat all the same, whether you eat meat or stay a vegetarian for religious purposes, or whether you, in the last verse, verse 22, drink wine. So we have a number of different issues. How you dress. Should women cut their hair, or do they always have to let it grow long? Yeah. In fact, I had a believer that tunes into this channel that actually sent me a question. And feel free to do that. Feel free to ask questions if there's something that's unclear or maybe an issue that you have a question about. But she actually asked me the question because she'd been around believers that judged her for how she did not dress, didn't meet their dress code standards for what a good Christian woman, how a good Christian woman would dress. And what I know of this person, it's not like she's dressing in any kind of unseemly manner. It's just that, wear slacks, that's okay. You don't have to wear a dress. And if you're listening to this and you're kind of chuckling going, really, that's an issue for me? Yeah, that is an issue for people. As much as drinking alcohol is an issue for some believers, or going to dances. I remember growing up in school and not sitting on the sidelines for a junior high sock hop because I didn't want to dance, because I was afraid it was wrong. Even though my sister went out, I couldn't do that. I just couldn't bring myself to go out there and do that. And my dad even said, oh, come on out there, because he was out there chaperoning as a teacher. Oh, I couldn't do that because it was a dance. How in the world I ever got that in my mind, I'm not for sure. But there are issues, and there's probably a myriad of issues that I haven't even thought of that fall in this area of a believer doing something but he doubts. So this area, he says, but the one who doubts is condemned if he eats. That is, he thinks that the thing he eats might mess up his relationship with God, but if from the following verse, he's doing it because he sees a mature believer doing it. And he thinks, well, if he does it, I guess I can do it. But he still doubts. He doubts that it's okay with God. And he says, because his eating is not from faith. And whatever is not from faith is sin. And be very careful with that last statement. That keep it in its context. In the context, not from faith is sin, has to do with the fact that you're believing God's promise that it's okay. This isn't talking about should I ride my bike or take the car today? Can I ride my bike in faith or drive the car in faith? This is not the issue. The issue is, do you think that an activity that you're going to do might impact your relationship with God? We've been over this again and again, but I continue to reiterate this because I really want you to understand there are believers today that think that their actions might negatively impact their relationship with God and in some way put they and God at a distance apart. Now, let's be honest. If you're acting a way that you shouldn't, mentally and in your mind, you are distancing yourself from God. God's not distancing himself from you. He's not saying, stand back. What you did, nah, you can come back tomorrow, but for the rest of the day, you're over there. No, that's not what God's doing. That is not what God is doing. It's with us. I always think with Adam and Eve, God did not immediately come to Adam and Eve and go, you guys sinned, get away from me. What happened? God comes down and calls to Adam, Adam, where are you? And Adam calls out and he goes, well, we're over here. And God says, what are you doing? He says, we're hiding. We hid ourselves from you because we were afraid. See, that's what man did. Starting with Adam down to the present time, mankind hides from God, does everything in their power to distance themselves from God and keep God out of sight or keep themselves out of sight of God. They can't, but we foolishly think we can. And that's even true of Christians, not just the unsaved man. And I think it's very important for us to recognize, yes, it can impact the way I think about myself and God, but it doesn't change God's relationship to me. It doesn't change how God's going to relate. God's going to continue to relate to me in his kindness and in his grace and in his goodness and in his righteousness. And you know what? Your actions might even merit, because it's going to happen to all of us according to Hebrews 12:6, might even merit some discipline from God. But even when he disciplines you, he's doing it out of love, because he really does want the best for you and I. So there might be some discipline in there. But as Paul says over there in Hebrews 12, don't chafe against the discipline and go, No, take the discipline and learn from it so that it bears the peaceable fruit of righteousness. Learn from that if that's what it comes to. But be mindful of the fact that in all of that, you are not separated from God's love. But if you have a matter, something that is questionable, and you think that it may negatively impact your relationship with God, then don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it until you are convinced in faith that it's okay, that it's what God wants, or that it's okay with God. Because then it is sin. It's sin for that person. So two people, I can eat meat, there's no problem. That person, they might eat meat, and it's sin for them because they're not doing it in faith. Same thing would be true with wine, an alcoholic beverage. Same thing would be true with the days that a person observes, or, like I said, a myriad of other things that would fall into this idea of what's okay and what's not. And Pastor Tim Holscher, I thank you for joining me and hope that you take these things into consideration so that you can be encouraging others, like yourself, I trust, in having a good day in the Lord. Thank you again for joining me.